Welcome to the online series of creative conversations produced by Arts Nexus, featuring practising arts makers from across far north Queensland, a place to explore the business of arts, the ups, the downs, where we get our inspiration from and what our aspirations are.
I'd like to welcome Sasha Zahra to our MeetUP. Thank you for joining us. Sasha is based currently up there in the Torres Strait on Thursday Island and has travelled the world, which we're going to find out a little bit in a moment. And I have known of Sasha for a long time. We've got mutual friends, but I haven't actually ever really found out stuff. So I'm really pleased to have this chat with you today, and thank you. Just quick, let us know what you're doing right now so we have a bit of a picture of, because you're in a lovely place. I'm not too sure if you've got a window nearby, but I just picture ocean.
Yeah, it's true. There is ocean very nearby. But if you looked out my window right now, you'd look onto the main street, the main drag of Thursday Island. But, you know, the water's just behind me. But yeah, as you say, I'm currently very lucky to be on Thursday Island for the next 7 or so weeks. And I'm working with a community organisation called Murakoska Sorority. And they're an amazing organisation that started off as a women's shelter and have sort of grown over the last 30 years to provide social and emotional well-being kind of programs to women and families across the Torres Strait, across all of the islands of the Torres Strait, but have their main offices based here in Thursday Island. So this year marks the 30-year anniversary of Murakoska. So I'm here helping to create a 3-day celebration of the 30-year anniversary and also run some workshops leading up to that event with some community groups. And so that the celebration will be a kind of mini conference women's gathering, I guess we're calling it. And that'll happen later in November next month. So that's what I'm here doing at the moment. I just arrived last Tuesday, so this is my day 4 in the office. So it's great and really, really amazing to be here. I've been to the Torres Strait before, but never for this long. So it's really lovely to be here for a couple of months and really get my teeth into this project and meet all the local amazing people up here, artists and community members, and, you know, get my head around all of the organisations. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing.
Great. So that's an amazing opportunity, and I don't suspect that's just come out of nowhere. You've obviously amassed a lot of experience along the way to give you the skills to be able to fly into a community that's fairly, not just remote, but in terms of distance from a major city, but also not that much known about. So you've got to have a skill set to be able to do that. So I'd like you to kind of go way, 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 way back. In your memory, or where it all began.
Okay, no worries. I'm really happy to do that. It's been nice actually thinking back through my journey over the last couple of days while I've been thinking about what I might share. So I was born and bred in Adelaide, South Australia, and that's where I went to school. I went to a Steiner school from the beginning of my schooling right through, and I won't go too much into my schooling, but for those people who do know a little bit about Rudolf Steiner Education, it is an alternative form of education in that, and I didn't think about it obviously at the time, but when I think back to, you know, who I've become and what I do with my life. I think what's really interesting about my schooling is that Rudolf Steiner is based on the idea that you kind of do everything. You know, you don't sort of stream off into things that you're good at or necessarily, things that people think you should do really at all. Really. So I guess from very early on, I was a bit of an all-rounder, and I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do, but I loved art and I loved sport and I loved people and I loved stories and I loved drawing. And so that schooling system worked really well for me in that I got to nurture all of those things. Some people it doesn't work well for at all. My brother, for example, went to the same school and hated it. But for me, it worked really well. So that's kind of where I was born and bred, and I studied my university degree in Adelaide as well, and I did a Bachelor of Arts in Drama Studies, majoring in performance and directing. So originally I thought I wanted to be a performer, and dabbled in that for a few years, and then in my final year of study, in my fourth year at uni, I stumbled upon directing, theatre directing, and totally fell in love with it. And I guess that's sort of what shaped the first part of my career. And when I graduated from university, I was kind of toying up between doing another post-grad year or whether I just get out there and do it. And I started my honours year and then kind of went, oh God, I don't think I can do another year.
Yeah.
And I was just itching. I was just really itching to kind of get into, my practice. And I was really, really lucky to, God, I think it was 2 months out of graduating, landed a job in a regional town of South Australia called Whyalla. It's about a 5-hour drive north of Adelaide, or about an hour, 40-minute plane ride. And I was really young, and there's an amazing organisation that's still going out there called Faces of Youth Arts, and it's a youth theatre company. And I got the job as the artistic director out there. Wow. And so I would fly in a very small plane once a week, and I'd go and spend 4 days. In Whyalla with a general manager in the back room of the Middleback Theatre. And I guess I learned how to run an organisation. Like, my job was also obviously to teach workshops and to direct shows and to kind of engage with the local community and young people in particular, but it was also to run a company. So I really quickly learned how to work with a board and communicate and write grant applications and advocate for the arts, locally and nationally, and all of that stuff really quickly. And I'd never done anything like that before. I was a new graduate, and I just learnt by immersing myself, by asking questions, by forming relationships with my funding bodies, and by talking to my local community. But I remember the first, major annual grant application I had to write, and I went, right, okay. I'd done little tiny bits of grant writing through, my own small projects, but never for an organisation. So I think that job put me in amazing stead, just to kind of, be bold and to not be afraid and to ask questions, and to also see needs in the community that I observed were needs, and then work out how to create projects and programs that responded to that. So I guess a really great example is when I first landed in Whyalla, I'd walk around the streets and have a look at, who was in the town, and there was lots and lots of Aboriginal faces in the town, but there wasn't one Aboriginal young person coming to the theatre company. And so I was like, okay, that's really interesting, given that this is meant to be an organisation for, young people, and that should be for all young people. It's quite a multicultural, really interesting town. It's, historically was a shipping town, and so there's lots of interesting cultural groups in the town. There's lots of Filipino families that had come in the 50s for shipping and who are still there. And so there was lots of other cultural groups coming, but there was no Indigenous families or young people attending. So I kind of went, well, that for me is an issue and a problem, and isn't reflective of, what this organisation should be. So that was kind of what I guess was the legacy that I left behind. In the 4 years that I was there, I kind of went about going, all right, we've got a really strong company with lots of amazing work happening, but there's a whole section of the community that's not accessing this place. How I started, and I went and started having meetings with elders and the youth centre and AEWs in schools, Aboriginal education workers in schools, and slowly over 3 years formed a whole Aboriginal arm of the company, which is still kind of going. And that was predominantly through dance. So that was, what we identified was what people wanted to do. So I started bringing up Aboriginal arts workers from Adelaide and other places to work with those people, and, sort of formed of Nunga arm, we called it, of the company. So I guess that's kind of was my very, very, very first real job, but I was young and I was a new graduate, and I feel really blessed to have had that experience. I stayed at that job for 4.5 years.
So what do you think was your specific, I mean, the fact that you were young obviously would be a very specific skill set for a youth company, but they obviously invested and trusted you to come to their town. What was that, do you think, the spark?
I think when I first did I remember doing the interview for the job, and it was a really interesting interview because it was really clever actually. I remember at the time being a bit freaked out about it, but I had an interview, but I also then had to run a workshop with the young people, and some key members of the board watched. And I had always been involved through my university years with a company called Restless Dance Company, which is another youth theatre and dance organisation based in Adelaide, but it is it predominantly engages young dancers with intellectual disabilities, and I was so it engages young dancers with and without a disability, I guess, in its ensemble, and I had been an ensemble member of that company while I was at university, and actually up until I started in Whyalla. And one of the amazing things I learnt there was collaborative theatre making processes. I mean, that was also echoed in some of the independent projects I was interested in and was kind of making through my university years and through some of the independent stuff I was sort of doing. But I think, I don't think I was conscious of it at the time, but the artistic director then, who's an incredible woman called Sally Chance, who's a theatre maker and predominantly a dance maker. She's still making amazing works, but now making works for very, very, very small children, which her practice is very interesting. It was really instrumental, I think, in some of those things that I still use today. It's incredible in how I approach working with a group. And I guess in this sense, I'm talking about when I'm in a room making work, which is very different to some of the other work that I do now. But that process of how you look at the strengths and offers that are given to you in a room that might not necessarily be presented to you in the most obvious way, and how you find those little seeds and you pick up on them, and then you're able to pull them out and turn them into something, is a way of listening, and it's a way of observing that might not be a traditional way of doing that. And I think that was instilled in me through the work that I did with Sally. And I reckon that that's part of what they, that group of people saw when I was working with those young people who I'd never met, and didn't have a relationship with. So you very, very quickly have to go, all right, how do you instantly break down barriers? How do you instantly get people to feel comfortable? How do you instantly, in a room of people that you don't know, with really varied abilities potentially, or in other contexts might not speak the same language as you, or all of those things which kind of have, now inform my practice now. How do you sort of, how do you navigate those things really quickly?
Like, that's a key element, isn't it, about working in the regions, is you kind of got what you got in front of you. It's not like you can search further. You have the smorgasbord of talents in front, whether they're relevant or not, and you've got to shape them. So what an amazing opportunity for a young person. Yeah. You must have been in early 20s. So what do you think is the key influence on your own personal practice?
So I guess that there's a few things. I guess I've mentioned Sally Chance, which subconsciously I think was a really amazing influencer on my early kind of years as an arts practitioner. And then from there, once I was ready to leave Defaces, I really enjoyed my work with the Indigenous community up there, and knew that I wanted to continue that work, but wasn't exactly sure how I was going to do it. But I knew that I had a real interest in those stories that come from the regions and from our Indigenous people. So that was something that really did inform what I sort of did next. I went back to Adelaide after Defaces and was a project officer at Kurrruru Youth Arts Centre.
Yes.
For quite a while, and started doing quite a lot of work in the regions, not just with Aboriginal young people, but sort of doing one-off projects where we'd go into a region and make a short artwork, whether it usually utilised film, music, and theatre. And we did a whole series of them. We did one in Ceduna and one in Port Pirie and one in Port Lincoln, which are all sort of regional towns, regional centres outside of Adelaide. And I sort of developed those skills in that area. And then that led me to land at Port Youth Theatre Workshop, which was an amazing organisation in Port Adelaide, another youth theatre company that was kind of going through a real transitional period in what it was and how it was working with young people. And it had traditionally always worked with disadvantaged youth in and around the Port Adelaide area, and also had quite a high Indigenous population of young people attending. Worked with some really incredible people there. One of those people is Dia Alpharenk, who has been a key person to me being here in the Torres Strait. She's an incredible friend of mine, but also an amazing arts worker.
Don't give it away, because she will be joining us at some point too with a Zoom meet.
Okay, I won't give it away. But
no, because she's very busy with her current project. But when that subsides, she'll be available.
Yeah,
I should reveal too, because that's where I first met you, and through that Port Youth Theatre, and
and through that time, what was really interesting about that work there was that myself and Diat and a number of different general managers. So Diat was the cultural director, and I was the artistic director, and we helped transition that organisation from being, a regular theatre company into solely an Indigenous theatre company. And so that was a really interesting process. But while I was at Port Youth, then it became Kurrruru, Indigenous Youth Performing Arts, which is now, it's still how it exists. We were funded by the then Community Cultural Development Board of the Australia Council. That obviously doesn't exist anymore. But through one of the programs of the CCDB, there was this great initiative called Out There and Everywhere, and it was about linking up young community arts practitioners under 30 with organisations, with international organisations, with the kind of aim of making long-term connections. Some have maybe worked, which have worked, and some maybe haven't. And so I applied to go and work with an incredible NGO called Wan Smolbag Theatre in Vanuatu. And that happened in 2004. So I took some leave from Kurrruru and I went to Vanuatu for 7 months. And worked with Wan Smolbag. And that, I guess, sorry, I'm getting to my real answer, I guess, but that experience and working with that organisation was really formative in terms of what the next sort of part of my career would look like. And I guess in terms of my community arts practice, looking at a really different model. So I was really ingrained in sort of, CCD work and working with young people, working with people in the regions, working with Aboriginal communities in Australia. And we were really sort of at that time talking about, community leadership and how that works and how do you empower communities and, and individuals to really be the next generation of leaders. And then I was sort of landed in this incredible organisation who are the biggest, employer of Ni Vanuatu people in Vanuatu, who started Wan Smolbag is a pidgin kind of phrase that means a small bag, which basically is how the company started, with a small bag of props and 4 actors, and now is an employer of over 200 Ni Vanuatu people, and they're making theatre and films and TV series that are screened all over the Pacific, and are a real leader in sort of using art for, education and social change, in a region that is still developing and that has a massive number of issues, as any developing country does. So kind of being immersed in that place, and being thrown in the deep end, really. The first thing I had to do when I got there was direct a whole lot of short plays to tour to outer islands, in a language that I didn't speak. So you instantly...
The things you do.
So all of those skills that I'd sort of have touched on before were instantly like a whole nother level of, okay, how do you do this, and how do you start to negotiate these things, and how do you communicate, when you're only using bits of your language and bits of other bits of language.
You went from experience to experience. Did you ever plan your career in a way? Like, did you ever have an aspiration and go, I'm going to go?
No, it's so weird, because now I look back, because, the next jump that I took after this little period is into major festivals, which is a whole nother area. And that's really what my last 10 years practice has been. Major festivals and events, really big ones, so I've kind of, but it's really interesting, because just in the last year, I've kind of almost done a whole circle. And while I'm still working in that sphere, I've kind of started to go back to my original practice. Like, I've just directed 3 shows, which I haven't done for a while. And I'm gone back to kind of working with community. But I think all of those things really inform each other. So it's been really interesting. But no, I didn't actually ever sit down and go, right, I want to be an artistic director of a youth theatre company, or I want to be the creative producer of the Adelaide Fringe Festival, or any of those things. I think what was always important to me was the people I was working with and the experiences that I was going to get out of that particular job. And so that's kind of more how I progressed through things. So after my time at Wan Smolbag, which was 7 months in its first stint, I kind of came back really inspired by, just the way that organisation worked, and how, without any labels of community development or CCDB or any of that, they didn't even really understand what that was. I remember getting there and them going, so what is this CCDB thing that's paid for you to be here? Like, what is that? And I went, well, not understanding those labels and going, well, that is, basically exactly what you do, in a nutshell, but in a really organic and real way that is very, for me, I really grappled with it, because in, Australia, we're still so bound by the constraints of the way organisations are set up, and the way we have to work with our boards, and the way we have to consult. And, if you really want to work with community, that doesn't always necessarily, those things don't always fit together, So I remember one of the last things I did in Vanuatu, before I left, was by that time my Bislama, which is the pidgin English that's spoken in Vanuatu, was good enough for me to be able to be of use in an AGM. And so the director of the company said, why don't you come to our AGM before you leave, and you can take all the notes, and you can just listen. And I thought that would be great, because I hadn't ever done that before. And the AGM went for 3 days. And that is because it's an organisation of 200 Ni Vanuatu people who are still, who still are living in communities where, when there's an issue, a chief would come forward, the chief would propose some solutions, then people together would come up with whether they agree with those solutions. So you kind of go, if you're actually truly engaging with this community, which is this organisation, and not that everybody of those 200 people talk, but the people who want to, if you're actually going to do it in a real way, if there is an issue, then the whole group is going to come up with a solution of how we're going to deal with that issue, what the consequences are going to be, how we're going to do it. And that takes time. And, we just don't work in those kind of ways in a real, in an organisation here. And so I just found that whole process so incredible to kind of go, if we're talking about empowering communities, then it's actually taking the time to do things in a different way, and to listening in a different way, and to being open to the fact that the solutions to some of these issues, or the way that we're even going to talk about solutions, might just be timelines that are so different to what we're used to doing. They don't fit into a funding round, or, you know, and so it's about kind of going, how do you take some of those ideas and take that back in? I mean, not that you can recreate, you know, that's very specific to that place, but and that kind of cultural context. But, you know, if you kind of think about some of those ideas and go, how do we take those back into what we're doing, and how do we set up different ways of talking to people and consulting, and how do we think about leadership in a different way? That was really interesting to me. So I came back, and I went back to my job at Kurrruru for a while, and then I got asked to do a maternity leave cover as the assistant artistic director of the Australian Festival for Young People. Which was the Come Out Festival then. And I went and did that, and I totally fell in love with a major festival. Yeah. And did that for a little, and then I ended up leaving Kurrruru because I decided that I wanted to kind of keep on this path for a while. I'd been at Kurrruru for 7 years, or nearly 6.5 years. And so that's kind of what I did next. I moved into this sort of festival environment. And after a year or 1.5 years, not that long, I delivered one festival, one Come Out festival. I then shifted over to become the creative producer of the Adelaide Fringe Festival, where I stayed for 6 years. Yeah, big festival. So and so I was there for 6 years, and then after that I decided that I wanted to freelance for a while and not work for a major organisation. I gave myself a year. I went, all right, I'm going to give myself a year and see if I can make it work. And it's been 4.5 years now, and I love it. So I have since then been kind of, you know, doing lots and lots of different things. Like I have been programming and producing a hub of venues, I guess you'd call them, for the Fringe Festival, but not employed by the Fringe. So programming and producing 6 large venues that pop up for the Fringe Festival. I also started a little mini Fringe with a colleague of mine in Stirling called the Stirling Fringe, which is a little town that we both live in. I also, through all of that time, have maintained my relationship with Wan Smolbag. So every year I go back and do projects with them when I can, and I've produced 2 major festivals for them in the last 10 years in celebration of their 20 and 25 year anniversary, and taken artists from all over the country and the world over there. And last year I also was the executive producer of the opening and closing ceremonies of the Mini Pacific Games, which were hosted in Vanuatu. Wow. So I guess I've kind of shifted into larger scale events, but it's really interesting. I'm still producing independent projects. I just directed a creative development of a new working with a writer and 2 actors, you know, and was in a rehearsal room for 2 weeks just before I came up here, actually. Totally independent work, you know, funded by Arts South Australia. And then I also have gone back into directing a little bit more in the last year, which has been really lovely. I haven't been making new work for a while. So I just directed an amazing show called Amphibian for Windmill Theatre Company, which is an incredible company based in Adelaide, making theatre and now films for young audiences, and do extensive sort of national and international touring. So I just directed a new work for them called Amphibian, which was looking at a refugee story that just had a really great season at the Adelaide Festival Centre. I also directed a couple of shows for the Adelaide Cabaret Festival this year in June. So yeah, it's been really lovely. I'm
busy for freelancing. That's
yeah, it is. I'm busy, and I'm very lucky that, you know, I am able to just line my contracts up to kind of keep rolling It's a bit scary when you kind of take that plunge from being employed by organisations to kind of do that. But I love the diversity of what I do. You know, I can be up here for 2 months doing this incredible project, and then the next thing I'm doing is immersing myself in multiple mini festivals that will run across Adelaide for the Adelaide Fringe and Festival period.
Wow.
For February and March. I'm working on another festival in Vanuatu for next year, and so I get to do the most diverse and amazing things, and I feel very blessed and lucky that I get to do that.
So amongst all of those amazing experiences, what is your proudest moment?
Oh God, there are so many. There are so many. I guess the mini games, the games in Vanuatu last year were pretty amazing. I'd never done anything like that before. I mean, I've done projects of that kind of scale through my work at Adelaide Fringe, but I'd never done it in a community, in that kind of context. I'd never worked on a sporting event to start with. But, they're really just the same. It's just, there's just a games charter, which kind of dictates, which was really amazing, which kind of dictates how an opening and closing ceremony, looks, which is kind of why they all are a bit similar, to be honest. There's kind of ways that things have to happen. But what was really amazing about what I was able to do was I really wanted to showcase women. Women in Vanuatu are incredibly strong and resilient, but aren't always at the forefront of, society in a public sense. And so I really wanted to showcase women, and I did some beautiful work with about 400 island mamas and we created this beautiful performance piece. And they were from really diverse communities around the island, and so I worked with them for about 3 months in lead up to that event, which was really special and really a real highlight, because it was something that they never would be able to usually be involved in, something like that's going to be televised nationally and internationally, and sort of be proud of their culture and in that sort of way. So that was amazing, and also just working with a completely local crew. That there wasn't enough resources to bring in the skill set that you usually would have, let's say, on an event of that scale. So it was pretty incredible going, but I worked with a completely local team, and so I was kind of, I guess, teaching people and mentoring people as we were going, which was incredibly time consuming and at times stressful, but also at the other end was so rewarding, because people were just completely up for it and really trusting and worked incredibly hard. And so to be able to pull something like that off with relatively limited resources, enough to do it, but if you kind of looked at those resources and compared them to what we would have for an event of a similar scale here, you just wouldn't believe that it would be possible. So I was incredibly proud of that and pulling that off and what we achieved. But there are so many along the way, there's just little moments. If I think back to some of the incredible young people that I worked with back at Kurrruru, and just watching the progression of one young person who, I remember this one boy that came from he was an Anangal boy from the Pitjantjatjara lands, and he came and did work experience with us, and he was so incredibly shy the first day that he came and wouldn't look any of us in the eye, and we were just like, God, how are we gonna? I remember Dee and I just going, what are we going to do with this kid? He's so shy. But, and he did work experience with us for 3 weeks, I think it was, and then ended up moving to Adelaide for school and joined one of our theatre groups. And then and then just watching his progression individually through engaging in the arts and slowly coming out of his shell, and then kind of you know, he was an incredible dancer and singer, but those first couple of days, you know, it was almost impossible to get him to say his name, and then to sort of watch him now, and he's gone through chasm and is an incredible actor. And, you know, so you kind of go, wow, those little tiny moments that you kind of impact are just as important and rewarding as those huge, you know, events that are in the public eye.
And we haven't got too much time left, but I think that you've picked up on a really important point that's driven home to me a lot, is that longitudinal tracking of people's progression. Sometimes the big moments don't happen until some years later even, and so just staying around and being part of that. So I think that, you know, sustaining yourself and making sure you are there for when those big moments happen. Yeah. So in terms of regional, like you're still obviously attracted to the regions. What would you say is you missed that?
I missed, you just dropped out for a sec. Can you just
saying in terms of working in the regions, you've come back to working in the region, so obviously that you are still interested in that. What would you say is the key difference with working in a region and working in a major city, apart from the resources, of course?
Look, I think it depends on what the region is and, you know, where you are and what your relationship to it is. But I think as an outsider or as a guest or as someone who's been invited into a region, I think the biggest mistake we can make is thinking that we're experts on everything just because we've got some skills to share. And for me, and that's what I love, it's what I've, you know, just been doing for the last 4 days since I've been here, is I love just going into the community and connecting with people and asking questions and listening. I know it sounds so incredibly simple, but so often we're not very good at it. And you know, you have to shut up and listen. And lots of people find it hard. Lots of people find it really hard. And it is probably one of the most important things, is to actually know what you don't know and don't pretend that you do know it, particularly when you're visiting a community or it's not your community or it's a new space, and allowing other people to be the experts in areas that you're not, and empowering them and working with them to do the things that you can't do. It would be different if I was getting into this community. I'm just using this as an example, and I was going to be here for the next 3 years, but I'm not. I'm just here for 2 months. And so there's only a certain amount that I'm going to get to in that time. But there are people here who are totally experts, that know exactly what's going on, that know how to do it, that know how to navigate all of that stuff that I don't know how to navigate necessarily. And there are things that I'm great at and that I can make happen really quickly, but there are other things that I can't. So I think it's really important to know, to be aware of that, and not to come into a community and just kind of railroad. That doesn't mean don't come in with a clear plan and get shit done, you know, but it's also the way that you do that. And I think that that's something that I've developed, you know, I think it's inherent in who I am as well. Like, you know, it's you know, you can't really teach people that necessarily. You either have the ability to do that or you don't. You know, it's a hard one. But so that's something that I really enjoy about coming into these new environments and going, okay. And by being a good listener, you get to know really quickly what's going on the ground. And then you can kind of find ways to pull those things together, to find, you know, to find threads and go, right, this is the way. If we get this person and this person and this person, then we can quickly navigate this stuff, rather than me trying to come in and, you know, to kind of try and take over all of the time. It doesn't necessarily, it's not always the best way forward. So that's, I guess, that's one of the things that I really love is that ability to, you know, and you get to meet people, like to tell their stories and like to share their stuff, you know, but they don't, you know, you have to, it's still theirs, you know, and people are really generous when they feel like you're going to take things and do it in the right way, or you're not going to take things. Taking things is probably the wrong words to use, but that you're going to share things, in the right way. People are really generous.
So I think that's a beautiful take-home message, Sasha. This will be, just so you know too, Sasha, in case you want to go back later or share it, uploaded on our podcast channel, which Arts Nexus is developing a lot of content for regional people to feel that they can actually access information and meet yourself. How else would you have met you?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Is there anything in sum up that you would like to say or share with our regional network? We work right across Far North Queensland with people that live way out and on the islands and up through the Cape. So, what would you like to share with them?
Thanks for listening, if you're listening. And don't be afraid to get your ideas out there. Like, I think lots of people in the in region just feel like it's too hard sometimes to get stuff started. But, have conversations, share your ideas, hang out with like-minded people, and find ways to get your stories and your ideas and your visions out into the world, because, they're brilliant, and every region and every community has unique and amazing things to share.
Yeah. Yes, which, we're very fortunate at Arts Nexus to do that. You've only just come into the region. Just got to know a little bit more about Arts Nexus as well. Where do you see agencies like regionally based organisations fitting into your work as well? And
look, I think as a freelancer, it's brilliant. I mean, I'm only just getting to know the amazing work that you do, as you say, across the region. But I think what an incredible resource and support, particularly as a pool information or a hub, I guess, of information, and, being able to go, all right, this is all of the incredible stuff happening, and these are the organisations and these are the venues that exist, it is incredible. But also as a freelancer who may, down the track go, hey, I'm interested in this project, or this community's interested in making this happen, and then having an umbrella kind of organisation that can help to support that kind of stuff is incredible, and such an amazing one for the region. So I look forward to kind of getting my head around all of the vast and amazing things that you're doing more. Like, I've only just sort of touched the tip of the iceberg, I guess. And also just understanding more about what's happening in the region, because it is a really diverse and interesting region, as you say, that, that I'm not across. I'm just starting to learn a little bit about it. So I'm really excited about developing my own knowledge and interest and understanding of the region and how it works as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Sasha, for your time. I know you've got to go back to work, and I appreciate that. Yay. And we look forward to finding out a little bit more, or maybe have you come to visit us here in Far North Queensland as well. You may see her or hear from her very soon.
I would love that.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Thanks for inviting me.
No worries. And thank you to Claire and Meryl down there at Rainy Day Books, and all those that log in later. We thank you for your support.
Arts Nexus is a capacity building agency working to grow creative people, communities and industries across Far North Queensland. Find us at artsnexus.com.au, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter and share your thoughts.